This Institute of Ideas podcast is called Is Gaming Corrupting Youth? And was recorded at the Battle of Ideas 2015 at the Barbican in London.
Okay, by my clock it's 4 o'clock, so I'm going to get cracking. Welcome to this discussion here this afternoon, which is gaming corrupting youth? I'm Shirley Dent. I'm going to be your chair for this session, and without further ado, I'm going to hand over to my co-producer, Freddie Sagal-Cuthbert, who's going to say a few words about why we're doing this.
Good afternoon. I'm Freddie Sagal-Cuthbert, and I co-produce this session. And I'd just like to say a few words about why I thought this session is important. So I suggested that we include this session in this year's Battle of Ideas because gaming is important. It's come close to eclipsing the music and the film industry in terms of revenue, and the characters and narratives created by gaming have caught the imagination of millions. But so far, unfortunately, the debate on this subject has just been reduced to an angry yet banal to and fro over whether video games make us sexist or racist or turn us violent. I'm sure our panel will raise the discussion of this debate to the level that this debate deserves. Thank you.
Thank you. Well said, and I think there's a bit of a challenge there for the panel already. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce them. I'm going to be quite brief with the introductions for time's sake, out of no disrespect to the panel, but for time's sake. I'm going to introduce them in the order they are going to speak. So, first, directly to my right, I have Richard Lewis, who is, in a nutshell, a veteran games journalist. At the far end, at the right, is Dr. Mark Coulson. He's a reader and associate professor of psychology at Middlesex University, and he's a contributor to the collection The Video Games Debate. Right at the far left, we have Sabrina Harris, who's a technical author, longtime gamer, and commentator on internet subcultures. Then in the right, on the middle, we have Carl Miller, who is research director, the Centre for Analysis and Social Media at Demus, and is looking at how, and this research centre looks at how the rise of the digital world affects our politics, society, and in a nutshell, us. And then last but not least, directly to my right, I have Christina Hoff Summers, who is a writer and resident scholar at the American Enterprise Institute. And she's very well known as the host of the weekly video series, The Factual Feminist, on YouTube, I believe. 4 million hits a week.
No. So far.
4 million hits so far. That's still quite impressive. Christina is a renowned public intellectual, I think it is fair to say, as well. I am not going to bang on too much because I think Freddie has said it. It does what it says on the tin, this debate. Is gaming corrupting youth? The panel will have about 5 minutes. I'll be quite strict with timing. Okay. Is gaming corrupting youth? Richard, are you a corrupter of youth or not?
Well, certainly not in the work that I do, I hope. But anyway, I'll just introduce myself. I'm Richard Lewis. I'm a veteran games journalist, and I've been on the front line of games reporting for over a decade, particularly that curious niche called competitive gaming, and I've been doing it before games journalism was so politicised. Indeed, I've got a colleague who used to be a games journalist who's now covering Middle Eastern politics, and he recently messaged me and said he'd never go back because his current job is less inflammatory and dangerous. I must also apologise for my voice. I picked up a bit of a cold. I was out at a gaming event in Serbia, which made it touch and go if I could attend this event, so apologies about that in advance. And I can only assume it was a similar affliction that led to the withdrawal of The Guardian's Keith Stewart, rather than a flagrant act of intellectual cowardice and disrespect to the panellists
It wasn't.
Anyway, when framing this debate, I think it's important we talk about moral panic, and that's what I'm going to do. I'm just going to get right into that. I'm not going to tell you anything anything that you haven't heard before. But anyway, when talking about it, we have to look at, historically, how all societies have deviated towards these moral panics. And it's a convergence of two phenomena. So first, civilized societies sort of historically have feared that there will always be some force that they don't understand that will infiltrate the ranks of the youth and corrupt them. And this in turn will lead them to dismantle the society that the old and wise generation before us all has built. So that's seen there historically. If you think this is anything new, I suggest you read upon the trial of Socrates. Which brings me to the second phenomenon, which is, of course, the invention of moral panic. And it is an observable phenomenon in relatively stable and comfortable countries, certainly in the West, where in the absence of real problems, we strive to create false ones because too many businesses depend on it. So first and foremost, the mainstream media. And of course, second of all, any company, charity or group that can claim to peddle the cure to this newfound societal ailment. So there'll be those of you here, older than I, who will recall how Elvis Presley's unfettered pelvic thrusting, now known as the patriarchy salute, was going to drive the youth wild with rebellion fueled by a Dionysus-like approach to sexual freedom and revelry. And of course that never happened, and you will see a few disappointed aging faces, I'm sure, around the audience to testify to that fact. I've always been a nerd, so my first rub with moral panic was Dungeons and Dragons. Yes, a few knowing laughs in the audience there. The media said that this mere game of papers, pencil and dice and models, if you could afford them, could and would invoke Satan. It was compared to a Ouija... don't laugh, this is true. It was compared to a Ouija board, and I remember my mother eyeing my bestiaries and compendiums with a newfound alarm after a TV detective show called Taggart featured a group addicted to Dungeons and Dragons involved in not only a murder, but the IRA. It's true, I can't remember the name of it, but Google it. After that, it was nunchucks or nunchaku, the Japanese fighting sticks that would bring about the fall of Western civilization. They were portrayed as the most deadly weapon in the world, and it was clumsily edited out of Enter the Dragon, the film. Now, if you go on YouTube, you'll see plenty of clips of people using these deadly weapons and injuring only themselves. It'll remind you of the Darwin Awards. Next, we had video nasties, films so evil and depraved that no one must ever see them except a board of educated upper-class intelligentsia who are simply too intellectual and wealthy to be corrupted by what us mere plebs cannot be exposed to. And onward it goes, rock music, gangster rap, even Harry Potter, a child's book read primarily by adults, was accused of promoting witchcraft, and which brings me on to games. So they've come after gaming a number of times, and sometimes it's very general. So games make us violent, games encourage school shootings, so much so that the first line of inquiry in these tragedies is often what games did they play. Games are pornographic, games are as addictive as opiates, and games make us antisocial. They can be oddly specific as well, such as the Daily Mail's absurd claims that Call of Duty is used by jihadis as a terrorist training tool. I'll let you insert an obligatory joke about respawning here. Christian groups have also attacked Pokemon, claiming it's a game that teaches children about the occult, or even worse, evolution. Yeah. Most recently, we had to read about a GTA, that's Grand Theft Auto mod, that enabled virtual rape, which of course was no more than the long-standing practice of honest-to-goodness teabagging invoked by gamers. It was described as a disturbing new trend in the Telegraph. So what does the science say? Well, I'm not going to bang too much on about that, as we've got certainly people who are better qualified. But ultimately, the science doesn't point to anything that would make us think we are being systematically corrupted by being exposed to gaming. So I will throw you over to my esteemed colleague, Dr. Mark Coulson, at this juncture to do it.
Oh, my goodness, you're taking over the chairs?
Sorry, no. I just want to be succinct and on point, I think.
Great introduction. Can I just say, let's stick to the debate at hand, and if people aren't here, they're not here, is what I would say. Mark, over to you.
Thank you, Richard. I'll take a slightly contrary line, I think, to Richard. I think, as a psychologist, one of the things that we observe is that everybody, children especially, are impressionable. When we look at the content of modern games, we see excessive violence, we see over-sexualization, we see even misogyny and amoral behaviour. And I think it's very straightforward. In fact, it's pretty much self-evidently true that these games are corrupting youth. I think it's self-evidently true in exactly the same way that it's pretty obvious that the Earth is flat and that the sun goes round it, and that opposites attract, smoking is good for you, and that heavy objects fall faster than light ones. Of course, we know that all of these self-evident truths are in fact false. I hope you think they're false, because they are. How do we know this? Well, we know this through the very thorough, the very careful, and the very detailed and public activity that we call science. When we look at the scientific data, then just like Galileo dropping cannonballs off the Tower of Pisa, the sacred cows of our beliefs, our moral panics, are slaughtered in front of us. We do not see a rise in violent crime, despite the fact, as Freddie observed, that sales of video games have soared over the past few decades. Violent crime is decreasing. We don't see an increase in amorality. Our children are as adept at knowing the difference between fantasy and reality as they ever were. We also don't see a descent into an easy, effortless life of meaningless pleasure. Sigmund Freud taught us 100 years ago that that's the way we are. We're like that. Society, as an invention, takes us away from our base human nature. And in fact, those parts of the brain that enable us to overcome that base human nature are the very parts of the brain that games exercise, our frontal lobes. Play is a very fundamental feature of our species, not just our species, but other species as well. Play enables us to experience things that we wouldn't be able to experience otherwise. It offers us safe environments in which we can be other things, we can carry out other acts, we can learn the consequences of actions that we might never actually engage with in normal life. And that is a good thing. Thank you. I shall not introduce the next speaker.
Thank you. Very succinct. Thank you, Mark. Sabrina, over to you.
So we've already got some experts on the panel on the violence thing, so I'm not going to concentrate too much on that. But to elaborate on the whole moral panic thing, I think that a conversation about today's youth is also a conversation about the future of society, because our collective fears are projected onto young people, and I think that's why so many moral panics focus on them. And obviously gaming is absolutely no exception, and it follows in the footsteps of panics over other media like TV and film. I think if you did believe all the headlines you saw about video games, you would think that they're going to end the world, really. It's ridiculous. I mean, between the right-wing press's fixation with games causing violence and the left-wing obsessed with their supposed misogyny, I think it's undeniable that fear-mongering about video games gets clicks and attention, and it's very predictable. As we've already said, I think studies have yet to establish any serious connection here to violent acts, even including research papers with incredibly flawed methodology. We're talking tiny sample sizes and really very odd ways of measuring aggression in some cases. So I think, if there really was an endemic problem, we would absolutely have much more evidence right now. We would be able to point to it. This is research which has gone on since the 80s. It's been going on for decades, and there's still nothing out there which really points to a big link. So, yeah. I think that the allegation that they cause or perpetuate sexism or misogyny is similarly unfounded. I've used both words because feminism seems dead set on watering down misogyny these days. I mean, you've got a skimpily clad woman, misogyny. I don't think that's a very fair criticism. So I would just want to go on to some problems that I've got with feminist criticisms of video games. The first one is that there's often there's a selective use of evidence. Things are taken out of context so much. You see a couple of skimpily clad women in a video game, and that's used as evidence that the whole game is sexist, Video games are very complex. There's a lot of framing issues. I mean, stuff talks about it frequently ignores things like mechanics and the broader context of the game. I mean, Anita Sarkeesian is particularly famous for doing this, and when she's talking about video games and saying, okay, you're encouraged to kill these female characters, when actually you're not, there may be a system in place which penalizes you for doing so, or you can kill women, blah, 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 but you can actually kill both genders. There's absolutely no preferential treatment there. That's a problem, that this is being used as a weapon. The second issue, I think, is that a lot of feminist criticism, like with the stuff about violence, it's more about removing content which they personally find distasteful rather than removing stuff which is actually harmful. And I think we need the evidence first rather than, jumping to conclusions, basically. I don't think the evidence is there. The third problem I have is I've been gaming since I was a little kid. I know many women who have as well, and we are frequently erased in these discussions. We are ignored, and it's just not very fair, really. And I don't think it takes stock of how diverse games have always been, are at the moment. I think it's around 5 and 10% of games released in the last 5 years are rated mature. And then the rest of them have all levels of content. You've got all sorts of games out there. There are, action-adventure ones, there's RPGs, and there's just this tunnel vision on certain types of games. So I think that's a real problem as well. I'm going to finish up with a quote for you, which is something I'm a little bit alarmed by. This is a feminist games journalist, and I will quote, "By 1996, most of my female classmates had stopped playing video games. I think some of this had to do with societal pressures, but the rest of it had to do with the N64. Even now, its controller is nonsense. In 1996, it was outright galling. Where had all these buttons come from? Why was it shaped like that? Why was there an analog stick stuck in the middle of it?" I think this is a really big problem. It's so insulting as a woman to, have these kinds of allegations thrown out that women can't cope with the complexity of video games. Another developer recently said that, women prefer low poly counts. I mean, what on earth? This is sexism. That is sexism. It's not a problem of gaming being sexism. It's a problem of feminist criticism being sexist. Thank you,
Sabrina. Carl, evidence or not?
Evidence or not, well, everybody, a very, very good afternoon. I loved the N64 controller, incidentally. GoldenEye N64 was one of the best, one of my first entries into gaming. Well, I hate going at the rump end of panels, ladies and gentlemen, for the simple reason that I've sat here in horror. I've been keeping it quite together on my face, but I've been screaming inside horror, checking off all my points already being raised by all of the panellists. It's awful. So I've binned half the things I was going to say. I mean, of course, yes, firstly, there is always something which is trying to corrupt our youth. There is always a new technology which is being worried about. And in Plato's time, it was letters. They promoted forgetfulness. We would become the heroes of many things, and we'll have learned nothing. During the time of Johannes Gutenberg, as books were rolling off his life-changing press, it was the confusing and harmful, overwhelming amount of data that was being thrown at everyone. TVs, radios, newspapers, comic books. If anyone doesn't think that comic books were the source of a massive moral panic. There was in the 1954 book, Seduction of the Innocent, which was absolutely railing about the capacity of comic books to undermine and degrade the stature of the moral stature of our youth. And the list goes on and on. I mean, and there are some comedy ones and probably quite some serious ones in there. Alongside Harry Potter and Dungeons and Dragons, we had Twilight, Pokemon, and the Beatles. But we also had actually quite serious issues with which the moral panic's about. And as each generation comes across, it has to desperately try and deal with the question of how do we actually, in a time of radical change, radical social and political and technological change, how do we keep our hands on what makes us good as well as more capable? How does society actually develop morally as much as it develops in any other way? So the moral panics are always part of society and not necessarily a bad part of it. I actually want to live as part of society which is currently inward-looking and constantly on watch and on guard for things can actually damage society as much as improve them. And the question nowadays of the rise of the internet and the digital world alongside gaming is actually, to me, not actually a closed question about whether we're becoming a moral society. Every single day I work on issues about people using the internet and digital world to treat one another in horrendous ways. And I actually don't think that we use technology in many ways to actually be better to one another. I think we lack lots of concepts now about digital citizenship, about actually having responsibility to one another when we're playing games, when we go on the internet, when we use social media and so on. And this question of whether games makes us more violent, this specific proposition, is actually taken seriously by policymakers. So in 2013, Obama actually announced a raft of new funding for academic work into trying to prove or dispute this causal link. And actually, I think the academic community let us down in these intervening few years. It is perhaps an irony that the academic community has descended into bitter acrimony itself over whether games make us more violent or not. I'll quote you. Now, you have to remember, this is taken out of a fairly arid and formal academic paper, and it says the following. And this was written by one of the people that were up to their neck in this debate. Some scholars actively and aggressively attempt to quell dissenting views, disparage skeptics, question the motives of those who disagree with them, and enforce a highly ideological view of the field, complained this academic. This leads us to wonder what it is about doing aggression research that seems to make scholars themselves so aggressive. And therefore, policymakers really have struggled to actually react to this problem, because the empirical view, which everyone's been looking to the academic community to try and sort out for us, has remained so obscure. I mean, there are a series of slugging matches going on currently between different academic groups that all seem to put out theories on one side or another, and all consistent with the same group as itself. So this question is, I think, the link between video games and violence, whilst not necessarily being proven one way or another, we haven't actually as a society gone about proving it in a very good process at all, I think. I think the academic work on this has been quite thin and certainly politicised. But the final point I want to make, I think, is this, that if indeed it is evidenced at some point that video games lead to either violent behaviour or poor treatment of women or poor treatment of minority communities or so on, I think it also is liberating our youth as much as it is corrupting them. And I think that video games allow us to do those things which makes us feel human. Whether that is the discovery of watching someone walk to the edge of the Minecraft world, whether that is the capacity to work within systems and rules which reward us when we try hard, which allows us to develop social kudos or recognition or esteem in areas which seem like the other areas of life seem to have been denied from us. Whether it allows us to go into the kind of back of beyond in Grand Theft Auto and try and find Bigfoot that Rockstar constantly denies is there, yet there is, I think, overwhelming video evidence that Bigfoot itself exists. Or whether it's simply social belonging. And from my I'm a recovering gamer. From my own experience of it, it was that actually which kept me in games. It was those N-line MPORGs which made me feel like I was actually part of something, which made me feel like I was part of a community and part of a team where I could work with others to achieve the aims. I mean, I felt in those destabilising times in our late teens and early 20s, I took great refuge there. I took great meaning and comfort. I mean, we used to joke that leaving the game was logging on, not logging off. I mean, for us, the world behind that screen was more real than the one in real life. And for all those reasons, I think video games is art. It is aesthetic and social appreciation. It is emotional appreciation. It does so much to liberate us. It does so much to liberate young people too. And I think that as video games now are maturing, and I would love to see the same. Thank you. I'd love to see the same kind of sophisticated cultural commentary that we have with films and with theatre now happen with video games as well. I think it's incredible that we don't. I think the questions like this actually will leave behind, and it won't be any kind of genre-wide criticisms. It would be. Can you imagine if this was as art corrupting society, or can you imagine as theatre corrupting society? I mean, it's actually pretty. I think endemic of this still being a kind of first-generation step, and I think that as video games become accepted really as one of the major ways in which we express ourselves, it will become a question of each game rather than a question as a genre and as a whole.
Thank you, Carl. Christina, if Carl's nervous of being the rump, you really are the rump, but I'm sure it's going to be great. Over to you.
No, I'm delighted to be here, and I'm so impressed with the battle of ideas and many people that I've met. I'm sorry that Keith Stewart didn't come from The Guardian, because he would have disagreed with us. We would have had a debate. And I think he complained that he felt this was not a balanced panel, but all the more reason to come and be the voice of truth and reason and show all of us to be so irrational. I have done that on many occasions myself. I have gone to debates where I'm greatly outnumbered, so I'm very disappointed he's not here. And I am going to reinforce some of what you've heard, and others, you can challenge this. When I wrote a book called The War Against Boys some years back, before I knew much about video games, and I planned to include a section where I was going to argue that we were failing our young men by exposing them to this toxic form of play. I didn't know what I was talking about, but I was a responsible scholar, and I wasn't happy simply to quote some anguished politicians and some concernocrats wringing their hands. I wanted to see data, and I couldn't get it. I would find you can find a bunch of experiments that suggest that after playing Grand Theft Auto, some children might be more, show less sympathy. But they couldn't, there were no good longitudinal studies over time. We couldn't see, and then I saw this amazing data, and it's been mentioned here, that, for example, the millennial generation, video game nation, brought up on games, they were among you, some of you in that generation, are among the most law-abiding and in a sort of polite generation compared to others, just less mayhem all around compared to my generation. The baby boomers are worst of all. If somebody's in the emergency room for an overdose, it's a baby boomer more likely than a millennial. So I couldn't find it. In fact, I found the reverse. I found, that there was, I don't say there's a correlation, but if you look at the rise of the millennial generation and playing games, crime is going down and misbehavior of all sorts. But then there was a second thing. I have two sons who played games. They played, it was called Madden football. Okay, they played this downstairs compulsively and all the time, and I wanted to be worried about it, but I'd go down, they'd rush downstairs with their friends, and what I would see was not alienated young men. I would see happy kids bonding with their friends. There was some trash talk, but they were forming these, it was friendship, it was happiness, it was play. And I had read a lot about play for this book because you may have heard, a lot of little boys thrown out of school for, in one notorious case in the United States, a little boy chewed a Pop-Tart into the shape of a gun, and he was, thought to be problematic, and suspended for a few days. We have lots of these cases. And increasingly, adults are frowning on the play of little boys, the typical play of young boys. Girls do it too, but boys do it a lot more. It's called rough and tumble play. There's a lot of mock fighting, sound effects, chasing. It is the opposite of violence. According to, for example, experts in playground dynamics, Anthony Pellegrini at the University of Minnesota, he's a great champion of rough and tumble play. He said it's the high-spirited plays of young males everywhere. And even in other species, it's known to happen. And as I said, girls do it too, but they do it a lot less. If you watch little girls play, there's a certain amount of R&T, they call it, rough and tumble. But there's also turn-taking games and, above all, imaginative theatrical games. I used to like to play school with my friends, playing house, playing school. And so girls play is much more. Boys, with few exceptions, there's the rough and tumble. And increasingly adults don't see the difference. They will say, well, this is violent, because they're chasing each other and one saying, I'm going to kill you, and bam, they play swords, and it's pretend. And they're forging friendships, and boys who are good at rough and tumble play are popular. Boys who are violent, you don't see happiness, you see tears, they part as enemies. Boys who are really violent are not well socialized, not usually well liked. What I see in video games is the need for the same kind of analysis, because when it is play, it's not literally what you're seeing. You're seeing something quite different. It's imaginative engagement, and again with the bonds with others. And so I did not write. I didn't defend video games. I just thought, I have to come back to that sometime because there's a lot of misinformation here. And I made that note, and then by the time I came back to it, that's the moment that this Gamergate controversy hit, so I sort of got involved in that too. So the next point I want to make is that, there's a remarkable book called The Ambiguity Play by Brian Sutton Smith, and he explains that when kids get together and play video games that include a lot of battles and fighting, and it looks like fighting, he said, but it's the very opposite of fighting. This is a quote, carried out by those who are not enemies and who do not intend to harm each other. So I've determined that video games, like the rough and tumble play, it's a healthy pastime. It's a healthy form of enjoyment. And if your child does it a lot, it's more likely to lead to a career in tech than to become a sociopathic killer that we hear in the press. So what about sexism and misogyny? A senior reporter at Polygon spoke for many feminist critics when he noted that negative depictions of women in games help to, quote, justify the unequal treatment of women in real life, fewer opportunities than men, lower wages than men, violence from men. The list is almost endless. And I should add, he wrote that in response to a video that I made in my series defending video games. Now, it's true that some games depict horrific violence and mistreatment of women, but there's almost always more mistreatment of men, and it's almost always, as I said, it's fantasy. I did look at, I'm not a gamer, but I looked at some of these games, and I didn't like what I saw in Grand Theft Auto. It looked too violent. I wouldn't want to play it. But I frustrate my children by I couldn't watch Breaking Bad or The Sopranos. They were too violent. It's not for me. I would like, if I played video games, sort of themes from Downton Abbey or The Umbrellas of Cherbourg. I think my children played The Oregon Trail, if anyone remember that, and I thought that was a nice game. But but I don't require video games to conform to my tastes, and I think that behavior should conform to some version of the golden rule, but the rules of fantasy are more permissive. And look at children's fairy tales. And there's a lot of violence and mistreatment, and sometimes women are, I don't know, there was some woman came to a bad end in Hansel and Gretel, I recall. So I'll just, I'm going to come back to something I didn't have time for, but I'm simply going to say there is little evidence that these games are harmful. And not to be provocative, but I would say that what I worry about now, and I want more studies, is that I look at this third wave, trigger warning, safe space, check your privilege feminism that we're now seeing erupting, and that does appear to cause harm and engender misery, but we need more studies on that. Thank you.
Thanks. Great introductions. Thank you. And as Christina said, do come back to any points that you didn't have time to make in those introductions, because I'm sure there's a lot more to say from everybody, including you guys. I'm not going to dilly-dally about this. I'm going to go straight out to you. Do not be shy. I'm glad to see you're not. I'm going to get you all in, so keep it succinct. What I would say is let's start at the back. There's a guy right at the back. Can I have a mic down the front? Come down the front, one at the back. If you start. Yes, please, sir.
Oh.
Yeah.
Okay. So a sentence that gets thrown about a lot, sometimes unironically, is that gaming is corrupting the youth. But, in fact, there already is a solution to that, and it's been going on like this for decades. It's called game ratings, and you often hear that, it's Grand Theft Auto or it's Call of Duty that's, corrupting the minds of young children. But these games are already rated 18, and it's technically illegal to purchase these games as a child. So if anyone is to be blamed, it shouldn't be the game developers or the game itself. It should be the parents, and that's why the games shouldn't be banned, and you shouldn't ruin the fun for everyone else and for a small minority of the gaming audience that think that they're influenced by games.
Thank you. Please, and if you could just, can I see your hands? Can we get it down here, please, sir?
I'm also, I guess, like many of us, a long-time gamer, and I agree very much with what the panel said. Just picking up on what the gentleman at the back said, in terms of age ratings, I wonder if you'd take it a step further and look to remove or change age ratings on games with adult content.
Thank you. If you just pass it along to that gentleman. Sir.
I think there's some youthful rebels turning in their grave. The speaker has said, we don't corrupt youth, we keep them pure and simple and stupid or whatever. What about literature, music, drugs, sex? It was about corrupting youth. It was a great thing. It was
corrupter of youth.
You're a rebel without a cause. What you're rebelling against? He said, "What have you got?" And so you're saying we're not sexist, we're politically correct, we're not racist, we're not violent towards each other. The kids are just in a sort of lovely fancy world. It sounds awful. The question is gaming corrupting young people, right? The assumption there, you're so defensive about what it should do. And I suppose no wonder people are attacking games on that basis. And everyone goes, no, we're not like that. We're really nice. We're really simplifying. We're really pure. And the real problem is, with young people, surely, that they're not rebellious enough. They don't know what to rebel against, and the content's not there. And the question I think you might think about is, as a cultural form, video games seem to be rather limited so far compared to other things like music and like literature. I mean, obviously literature is a difficult thing to compete against, but even perhaps movies and more recently television, so that it's at a relatively low level. And so you're incredibly defensive and sorry.
I think there's a lot in there that's challenging and problematic, but we might come back to that. Sir, can I see your hands, please? Thank you.
Just for the sake of discourse, I'm going to play devil's advocate. So comparing games to other forms of media like film, music is a little unfair, I think, because it is interactive. And when you look at games like Manhunt, GTA, they have you perform things like torture. And my main point is that as graphics become more advanced with the introduction of Unreal Engine 4 and whatnot, do you think that people will become more desensitized to violence because there's not a clear distinction between games and reality then?
Interesting question. Who's got the mic? Thank you. We can just get along there. I'm going to get you all. I'm going to come back to the panel in a moment, and then we're going to go back out. Thank you.
Okay, I do agree with... is this working?
Is the mic... Just speak into it.
Yeah, I don't think this is something like good or bad, or it is a corruption. I think it is evolution, that we have a reality which is turning into virtual, and we perceive our reality now as something real, but it might be virtual as well. So it is evolution, and that is how it happens. It's just a question how much we actually want to kind of stick into this life, because the gentleman mentioned that his reality almost turned into the reality of the game, and in the same time he mentioned he's recovering from it. So which is the aim now, to recover or to really just let ourselves go into this evolution?
Again, very interesting. Sir, can I just see your hands, please? Can we just get it along here? Just here. Thank you. You, sir.
So, the first and most important thing that I want to say is that gaming is an incredibly large industry with many, many genres. So when people bring up these, ideas of violent games, they're generally a handful of the industry. So you brought up Manhunt and GTA. Well, I could bring up several games which aren't violent at all. I mean, the Sims series, Echochrome, and even Wii Sports. None of them are violent. So when you talk about games being violent and you're giving these examples, that's a handful of the entire spectrum. And with regards to video games being an art, I absolutely agree. In my opinion, a game like Bloodborne or Skyrim is equal in every way to a painting by Monet or Picasso.
Interesting. Okay.
We're a pro gamer panel, I suppose. Is there anything negative about gaming in any of your opinions? That's my question.
That's a lovely, succinct question. I'm going to take you finally for this round, and then we're coming back. We're going out again.
So, not being a gamer, but and this is obviously for the portion of more violent games, but there's a lot of female gamers that come out and say that they're being bullied for playing or having a harder time getting into the gaming world. And so I wonder, is there anything in that we need to address rather than the games themselves?
Thank you. Some great questions. Rebels without a cause. Sabrina, on that last question, could I come straight to you on that?
So I do think that there can be a problem, but there's also a disconnect between people who understand what's going on in a gaming scene With, for example, trash talking, I think that can look very intimidating from the outside if you're not used to it. And I think it's worth making the point that a lot of this is actually quite competence-based. You may get trash talked a lot, but it's probably unlikely to happen if you're actually doing well at the game. There is a lot of that in there. Also, there's a lot of gendered insults used, and this is a much wider problem than just gaming, but a gendered insult by itself does not mean sexism, in my opinion. You've got to, I think, acknowledge that when people are trying to bait for a reaction, they're going to go for what they think will get a reaction, and a lot of the time that means using gendered slurs. So I do think that there can be some problems in gaming with, the tone of people. There's always going to be a minority of people that are complete arseholes, It's just going to happen. I think that you need to just go out there and keep proving that you can do everything that everyone else can, so, yeah.
Oh, and I'll just add to what she said is in my study of boys, and having had 2 boys, what I see is males, when they're friends, they show their friendship by jokes at one another's expense. There's a constant repartee of little put-downs, and some critics of male culture, they call it a culture of cruelty, and that there's this the massive masculinity. And what I see again is there's this high-spiritedness, there's this kind of ragging on each other, and in the games that's carried over. And there are these authentic gamer girls that play these games, and they can do it. They're part of it. They're a minority. They seem to be about 20, at most maybe 25%, but they're right there and can give it right back and dish it. And then I think what happened is these cultural critics came in with their liberal arts education and very little experience with games, and they didn't understand what they were seeing. I don't think they understand boys, but I don't think they understand the young women who were part of that culture, and just saw abuse, and what was really was, again, affection or excitement or just playing.
Guys, do you want to... I'm going to... Mark?
Yeah, I think the issue of the portrayal of sexualisation is an interesting issue, and I think the question about are there any negative effects of gaming. I think we know from some of the data that, for instance, if you play a provocatively dressed female avatar in a game, it changes your behaviour. And I think the point the lady made about the sort of the confusion between the real and the virtual is a very important thing, because virtual worlds are, except for the fact that you're physically not there, they're as real as the real world is. The relationships that you form, and again our data support this, the relationships you form online are just as valid as the relationships you form in the real world. World of Warcraft Gold trades just like the US dollar. This is a real currency. These economies are real, the experiences are real. And what that means, as Castronova's argued, is that there's a semi-permeable membrane. You don't sort of log on and log off, because there's leakage in both directions, and what you do in your real life permeates your online existence, and what happens online affects your sense of self. And I think that can work in a positive as well as a negative sense. So whilst, as I say, provocatively dressed female characters may make us slightly more provocative, we may engage in slightly riskier behaviours, at the same time being able to adopt either sex within a game. I think one of the things that doesn't get mentioned about games is that it doesn't matter whether you're a man or a woman in a game. You are equally powerful. And that's an incredibly empowering idea. Our data suggests that there is a gender imbalance in terms of selecting the sex of the character that you want to play. Women almost exclusively prefer to play as women. For men, there's about 20 to 30% would prefer to play as a woman. We think there might be an explanation for this, but there are imbalances there.
I can give you an explanation for that. On Planet's side, if you played as a female avatar, your actual hit rectangle is actually slightly smaller. So a lot of heavy. We all played as female avatars. It was an actual advantage in the game. But for me, like,
you didn't just like the voices.
The voices were slightly quieter as well, which in some circumstances were actually. For me, I just think the wrong games are being spoken about in terms of being the poster child of the gaming industry. For me, the most interesting bits of game development at the moment are actually those games that are actually challenging what it actually means like to be entertained or to play, or for it feels wrong to call these kind of things games. They don't kind of feel like games. But what they are doing in their interactivity is forcing you sometimes to build these weird empathetic relationships with people or kinds of positions in society which you otherwise would have no idea about. So one example is Super Columbine Massacre, I think it was called, RPG, where you play as Claiborne Harris. And you start with the same bombs and the same weapons as they did. And the game isn't trying to make you forgive them, I think, or it's not trying to apologise for their actions, but it is trying to make you see the world. And this is very difficult. It's not fun. But it's trying to make you see the world through their eyes. And the other one is, there's a game where you try and take care of a terminally ill child. You know, and this is an upsetting and emotional experience, and it's saying that it felt wrong when I was trying to write a review of it. It felt wrong to use the word play in the context of interacting with that game. I think that far beyond these actually emotionally pretty shallow experiences of Grand Theft Auto or Call of Duty, with their towering production budgets, but actually, I think, very little to actually rope you in. I mean, it's more like The Last of Us. It's games like that, actually, which I think, you know, those are the ones which I think we should be talking about when we're actually thinking through whether the gaming in general is making us develop emotionally, allowing us to relate to people in new and better ways, widening our horizons and allowing us to understand difference in society.
I've had a nodding, Richard.
Yeah, I just wanted to add to that point. I think it's very important that we sort of understand that there's a new sort of cultural development which underlines that games are now art, and that is the gamer's protest, which is happening more and more because we're being told it's wrong to explore certain aspects of masculinity, femininity as well, I dare say. What we're starting to get is we're starting to get an influx of games like the one you talked about with Super Columbine Massacre RPG, horribly titled, where it's ultimately a protest and a pushback at these sort of cultural norms that are being enforced on people. And I'm sure we're all familiar with Hatred. That was released recently, and that was ultimately pushed back against the games media. You know, it was the usual frenzy. Has this game gone too far? And for those that haven't seen it, basically it's a chap, horribly scripted, horribly animated. He looks like he belongs in Kiss. And one day he wakes up and he just decides he's had enough and he's going to shoot up the town he lives in with an absolute ridiculous arsenal of weapons. It has some very graphic kill scenes, very much like Manhunt, which was brought up earlier. And of course the games media resoundingly rejected this and said this is an outrage, it's gone too far. Twitch TV, the streaming platform, refused to have it broadcast on their platform. And, of course, the studio revelled in all this negative attention. It was brilliant. It was brilliant for them. It was the #1 game on Steam the week it was released because we were indulging in a mass protest about being told what we can and we can't play. So I think this is, again, it just underlines exactly where we are with gaming, that it has become an art movement, not just some sort of frivolous entertainment.
Really interesting. I could listen to the panel forever, but I could also listen to you guys. Because I know a lot of you want it, so I'm going to go back out again. I'm asking everybody to be as succinct. You can make a great point succinctly. So let's see who wants to speak. Can I see your hands, please? Right, there's loads of you. You've got to be quick. Mic down here. You've got to pass. We're going to play pass the mic. Can I get the mic to the guy in the corner, and then you're going to have to pass it backwards quickly?
Hello. In regards to what was said earlier about female gamers being a bit nervous to join, the most recent game I've been playing online is StarCraft 2, and most of the time the complete extent of interaction I have with the other player is starting with the letters GLHF, which means good luck, have fun, and that's the only thing you'll say. So it seems to me that a lot of the sort of opinion about what it's like to be a gamer, male or female, is a lot worse than reality. And I think that sort of myth is probably doing more to keep women out of gaming than anything that actually happens in the game.
Thank you. Let's see your hands. Get your hands up afterwards so we can go quickly. Over here.
Hello. I'm also going to play devil's advocate here, and that's just because it's sake of debate, really. Back to GTA 5, which is almost endorsed by the panel, actually. There is no primary female character. There are only female prostitutes. I don't think there are male ones, but they can be killed for money. There's waterboarding that's actually endorsed by their kind of FBI imitation. Women are also more likely to run from fights than men, kind of a subtle, perhaps, hint that they are weaker and more female. And also, female Twitch streamers get a lot more abuse than male ones.
Thank you very much. Thank you. So, can you pass the mic back? Thank you.
I was at a panel yesterday about whether or not children should be scared when they're in their literature, and I was reminded of that by the point earlier about how us wanting to defend gaming against these allegations sounded horribly boring. So since we're probably going to reach a complete consensus on that gaming isn't corrupting youth, I think I want to posit the question: should it?
Thank you, sir. Pass the mic.
It appears that video games don't really change us, but they certainly do influence us. Like Devon Moore, he probably didn't commit the atrocities he did, where he shot 3 policemen, specifically because of GTA. But he probably learned something from the game, because humans were always absorbing information, we're learning, and we become ourselves from what we see around us. I recently saw a video as well on YouTube about how Grand Theft Auto is being analysed as a form of satire, like how the character of Michael is a satire on Californian lifestyle.
Thank you. Pass the mic back, sir.
Hello. I just wanted to say that to add something which possibly might be a bit of a concern. I used to play games in the 80s back then, which was before we had any internet, and I used to stare at the screen just waiting for games to load from the cassette. But I think the only thing I would say, and I'm not even sure you can call this corruption, to be honest, which is that the concern that my parents had for me was a little bit like this gentleman was saying, was that I was spending a lot of time on my own. I was an only child in my family, and I think my parents were quite concerned that I was playing games rather than going out and meeting girls, for instance. I think one of the cruel things that I find from the feminist angle on this is that boys are damned if they stay at home playing video games, which are supposedly misogynist, and then they're damned if they go out and try and meet girls and give them compliments, because that's also misogynist. So I just find that whole angle from people like Anita Sarkeesian rather offensive.
Can you pass the mic? Yeah, if we can get out of the top, I'll come down to you.
Quick question about there's Zen gaming, right? So like Journey and Pedals, I think it's Pedal. I'm just curious, like as a psychologist, do we think that it should be more people playing those games and other type of generations? Would that be beneficial rather than talking about the youth being,
Thank you. Can I just see? Yeah. Whoever's got it. Yeah.
I would say that we've got a problem that's not really been raised before the mics have come out, and it's just come out, and people have sort of mentioned this idea of immersion being a serious issue because it becomes like a large part of the concern. I don't think corrupting is really a word that can describe this issue, but I would feel that it was the strongest one. So would you say that the level of immersion that is now achievable with such realism in games is dangerous in itself?
There's a lot of people who still want to get in, but there's a lot on the table, so I'm going to take one last question. We're going to come back very quickly to the panel and then go out again. I'm going to get you in. Yes, you're going to be the last questioner in this round. Have you got the mic? Who's got the mic? OK, I'll take you next. You're going to be the last question, and I'll come out to you next time.
I just wanted to say, what would have happened if video games had been invented before books? Obviously, not feasible, but you can't interact.
Can you speak into the mic?
You can't interact with anything in the book. You can't play with other people, like you could read as someone else, but not.
Okay.
And you're promoted to be by yourself. Would that not be against? I don't know.
Good point. It's coming. The mic. Everybody just speak very clearly into the mic. Do you just want to very succinctly make that point again?
If books have been created after video games, wouldn't they be the next bad thing, because they promote you to be by yourself, you can't play with anyone else, and you can't affect the outcome of the book?
Thank you very much. Coming back quickly to the panel, who wants to kick us off? Carl.
I want to deal with this point about immersion, because I think it's completely right, and it's a very important topic we haven't actually plunged into yet. I describe myself as a recovering gamer at the beginning, and I was only half joking. I actually do really regard myself as being a recovering gamer. I think that there was a capacity, and certainly online gaming, where it was completely obsessive. And it really dominated my life for several years. And I really had to kind of wrench myself out of that. And I'm sure that other people have had similar experiences. And that led me to thinking, a while ago that I think there is certainly a problem there. I think one of the major problems with that is this clash of online and offline cultures. Now, we see on the internet, certainly, the growth of subcultures that have norms and languages and understandings and significances and meanings entirely onto their own. If you bring someone that has no idea about online culture and you show them 4chan for 5 minutes, they're toe-curling. They can't believe what they're seeing over there, right? I mean, they're seeing misogyny, racism, everything pouring out there. 4chan, that kind of community, really has developed quite strikingly different norms. Now, when someone goes from that someone lives in that world, they actually begin to really struggle, I think, to actually understand and accept the norms in offline life. And some people, I think, don't actually go back into offline life as a result. We have the problem less here in the UK. In Japan, I'm not going to try and pronounce the word, it begins with H, the departed. They think there are around 100,000 people in Japan now, broadly of my age, right, from their kind of 20s into their mid-30s, who basically don't leave their house. They're connected with depression, it's connected with very heavy internet use many males, wrapping it up, don't really have a job and spend their whole life on the internet. Now, that actually strikes me as being very socially problematic indeed, and certainly gaming as part of a kind of digital culture as a part of, I think, is part of the story, actually, and people feeling the door actually closes on them into offline life.
Thanks very much, Cole. Sabrina, you want to jump in?
The phrase for that is hikikomori.
Hikikomori. I know, I just didn't want to throw that out.
And I have a confession. I was one of them for a period of time, and I played World of Warcraft for 90+ hours a week at one point. I think that there are some problems here, but what we need to look at is the underlying causes for them. I'm not sure how useful it is to say, okay, this is, facilitating people who have maybe mental health problems, social problems, etc. The real issue there is that there's no support network available. In many countries don't seem to have any way of dealing with that. So rather than look at, video games as, there's not a lot we can really do. How are you going to find people who have got these kinds of problems say, no, you can't play video games? There's nothing you can do about it in that sense. It needs to be assessed differently.
Rehabilitation programs.
Rehabilitation how?
Actually, give them new routes back into society. This is becoming a major societal issue.
Yeah,
I think this sounds like a battle of ideas debate for next year. Maybe even Mark, you want to jump in?
Yeah, I think there are interesting issues there. I think, of course, one of the things that we neglect is that when I'm online and I'm interacting with other people online, I can choose how to be. I can choose exactly what I want to look like and how I actually behave, and to a limited extent, perhaps how I sound. Now, when I'm sitting here in front of you, I'm stuck in this rather lumpy, uncomfortable body. I don't have any real control over it. If I get a little bit nervous, you can see me sweating. So there is a sense in which my online behaviour is far more liberating, and in actual fact, you are much truer to yourself. You can really be the person you are, rather than just the physical shell that you're captured within. I think in terms of the immersion, I don't think immersion will be a problem. I think we are hypersensitive to reality. I think the limited amount of research on things like the uncanny valley has presented that fact to us very convincingly. We know when things are real and when they aren't real. In terms of addiction and excessive online behaviour, I think we've got to be extremely careful about these issues, and we've got to be very clear in our own minds about the difference between excess, addiction and dependency. These are very, very different processes.
Richard, anything to add?
Yeah, well, just a couple of things. Since this violence has come up quite often, that's the thing I'm more interested in. I kind of feel the online gaming feminist thing's kind of been done to death a little bit. No disrespect to anyone that wants to talk about that, of course. But to my friend over there, you were talking about Grand Theft Auto and its sort of lack of inclusiveness and diversity. Well, obviously GTA 4 had an entirely gay storyline where you could go on dates with other men if you wanted to. You could also kill them, of course. You could become a gay serial killer. And they were called Colonel Cuddles. There was a black character called Malcolm Sex. I think that's very inclusive and progressive, actually. To my friend over there that was saying that there are numerous games that aren't violent and you raise the Sims, shame on you. You can remove the ladder, lock them in the pool, and watch them slowly drown. I'm very disappointed in you. But we continually bring up the Columbine massacre, which has come up a couple of times, and obviously there are numerous other school shootings that have happened. It's alarmingly frequent. And the one thing we can demonstrably say that does encourage mass shootings is news coverage, which has been a point raised many, many times over. Yet I'm not really seeing any sort of pushback towards how about we approach the news coverage in a far less sensationalist way and a bit more sympathetic towards the victims rather than putting the shooter as being the centre of attention. I think that would certainly be a more productive debate than whether or not you played Call of Duty.
Christina.
Just to add on to that, I agree with some who've suggested never to use their names, or just maybe once so people can got together, but it gives them a kind of celebrity. And the Rolling Stone, even before they did that terrible story about the false story about the UVA fraternity, remember they had the bombers in Boston. They had photographs of these killers and making them look like rock stars and putting them on the cover. Very bad. Just a couple of points. All of these, this denigration of gaming, and recently all of the brouhaha over this alleged sexism. I got a letter from a game developer, a female, very successful, but she was telling me that she's now hearing from young women who say, well, I don't know, should I go into this? And it's almost as if it's a self-fulfilling phenomenon here where the media, and this is happening in science too, the fields are given a bad name. People say, oh, there's so much sexism in Silicon Valley. There's so much sexism in gaming. And young women are getting that message rather than the real message. For those who have the talent and the interest, there's an exciting field open to you. And it's very negative, and I wish some of the critics of games were here to hear that or respond to it. Another thing to say about the immersion and the addiction. Years ago, I was researching for something I was doing. I was researching data about eating disorders, and I spoke to this doctor, and he had a theory that almost anything people do, 5% of them will do it obsessively. And that was his theory for eating disorders. Everybody's dieting, and he said 5% are going to go off the deep end, become anorexic or something. But he had looked at gamblers and car racer, I don't know, everything. The runners, they were about 5%. So if you have you're going to find that statistically that people will go overboard. Now, what has to be shown is that gaming is doing more than other avocations and hobbies. Is it more of a threat? I mean, possibly it is. I'm open to evidence. But the simple fact that you can find cases of people, or it happened to you, you have to know whether or not this is beyond what's a tendency connected to other problems, obviously.
I'm going to go out again. Let's see your hands. I'm going to try and get you all in. We've got 15 minutes, so succinct. Can we go down here, this woman here? Get the mic down to these people, and we're just going to pass it. Right down there, that gentleman. Go.
I was really interested in your
Speak into the mic.
Your first observation of how you, I don't know, it seemed like you thought there was a problem of the perception of video games, like they're not regarded as an art. So I just wanted to make the observation. Art museums like the Smithsonian, MoMA are actually acquiring video games. So I think there is a massive change. And also looking at something like Call of Duty, Advanced Warfare. I feel like cinema, TV, and gaming are all colliding. That's an example of something that employs all of those. It's become much more cinematic. There's more narrative to it, and they're employing actors.
Thank you. Pass the mic, and so you. Yes, you go. You're not sir, but ma'am, go.
Right. I just wanted to say about the GTA not having female characters, playable characters, whatever. I mean, I don't think we should care. When I played BioShock games, all three, I didn't care that I was playing as a male character. What I cared about is the story, the fact what gender the main character is, and what that doesn't matter. Then there was a point raised about Twitch female streamers. If you've seen Twitch female streamers, you will understand why they get more sexual comments. It's basically 50% of the screen is the cleavage. What do you expect, really? And of course, as for the trash talking, in our society, it is still expected that guys will make the first step. So because guys who play games are usually more socially awkward, when a female joins any competitive game, of course they will act awkwardly around them. I don't think that's really a display of sexism or anything like that.
Thank you. Pass the mic in front. We will come back. We'll come back to you. We'll get you all in. Just pass it. We'll play pass back. If you can go there.
Just to the lady here. I think it's very easy to bagatelize issues just because they are not reality yet. I think they have to be regarded as tendencies and not reality. And then they become issues.
Thank you. I'm going to prioritise people who haven't spoken yet. I can see the person who's got. Can we get the mic up there? Thank you.
We've discussed gaming as an art. What about its move to become a sort of an e-sport and its development in that direction?
Thanks. Behind you. You go, ma'am.
Me?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, not a gamer. Should it corrupt youth? Does it corrupt youth? No. Should it make them more rebellious? I think also no, because I think that's both of them are sort of putting a technical solution on something that seems to me everything's pointing to the problem is actually within adult culture. It doesn't really matter what the kids are doing, and I'd hate to see games go into trying to get them more empathetic and nicer people. You know, they're already getting schools to try and do that far too much rather than teach them. I'm an English teacher. I hear colleagues say too many video games, that's why they can't read. To which I could say, or you could just try getting some good books and teaching them reading. That might work better than stopping them playing video games.
Thank you. Behind you, then we'll come back to you, sir.
So, of course, with Macintosh and his crowd, we often see these throwaway statements. It's proven that video games cause violence. You'll get these tweets, of course. There'll be nothing back. It might as well be on their C drive because it's nowhere. But it goes out there. What we have found is, just to be fair, that after playing games and perhaps losing, some people experience aggression. And perhaps that's gone down the hill like a snowball. It's become big, and they say, oh, that's become violence. This makes people violent. But what is aggression? And it's not necessarily unique to video games. If someone plays a sport and they lose, they might have 5 seconds of short-term aggression. To be able to flip and go back to being normal after that, that is what's called being an adult. That's what it's called growing up. You can learn that through video games like you can through anything else.
Thank you. Sir, can we get the mic up just behind you? Sir.
Carl mentioned his coming out of his obsessive interlude, to which I would say, well, congratulations, you just grew up. And
allegedly.
The thing is that there are people who get stuck in the subculture, aren't there? I mean, if you went to a back room in a pub in Burton-on-Trent this evening, you'd find people who still look like teddy boys, and they've looked like that since 1958, but it's not the jukebox that's done it to them. Growing up, as I say, congratulations. I think the gaming industry can be congratulated for growing up pretty fast in the last 15 years, really. But I would say to all of you who are going to make the next generation of games, there's still a lot of growing up to do. I think you do one character pretty well at the moment, which in Shakespearean terms is Mercutio, plague on all your houses, but there's a lot more characterization to develop, and you have to also respect that there are other art forms that don't press the same buttons that yours do. So, read books, read Shakespeare, and make your art form mature, keep it maturing, keep it growing up.
Read Shakespeare, hurrah!
I just wanted to say, I'm really glad that you brought up the uncanny valley, because you can tell the difference between reality and virtual reality, because when they start to merge, you don't like it, and that's how you want the two separate entities. You don't want them to merge, and that's why we want them. And also, just relating it back to another one of the moral crises, metal music. I'm a massive fan. I mosh. And it's like trash talking. It seems like it's a really aggressive, violent thing. It's not. I have never once been hurt in a mosh. And if you fall over, there are 5 people around you making sure no one steps on you, making sure you never get hurt. And it's from the outside, it looks violent, but it's not at all.
Hurrah for moshing too. You've got it. Keep passing it back.
It seems like the people who are so keen, they claim to want to promote diversity in video games and sort of get annoyed if there's a game that doesn't have a female protagonist as well as a male, seem to, rather than promoting diversity, just wanting games to be the same sort of mush. So with The Witcher 3 recently, which is based on sort of Slavic folk tales and a Slavic author and that sort of thing, there was anger that it was sort of set in Poland and everyone was white. And I think that if in every game you've got to have this sort of multicultural background and you can go as either a man or a woman, then it's a lot less diverse a world than where I can sort of go to Poland in a game one day and go and play the Yakuza games and see Japan, rather than everything being sort of a mix of everything.
Thank you. So can I just see who else wants to speak? Okay, can we get it over here, sir?
Right, so we've been speaking about sexism in terms of abstractions, but let's try and rationalize why professional gaming is almost exclusively dominated by men, and all the money from professional gaming is also won generally by men. Now, given that one person in the panel has said that characters in video games are uniquely empowering and gender neutral in terms of how you play those games, how do we rationalize that in terms of gaming?
Thank you. Go. Get it down here quickly. Can't just everybody get your heads right up into the air if you want to speak. Okay, I've got 3 people I can see. Go, and then over to you. Yeah.
Using the example of hatred and the sort of soccer mom outrage that GTA invokes, to what extent does this moral panic stimulate gaming and like the prevalence of gaming in the press, and how much has it stimulated it in the past?
Thank you. Freddie.
So this is just something to Carl, but you mentioned The Last of Us as if it's sort of some pinnacle of gaming and the closest gaming is going to get to art. But I think, The Last of Us is a very linear, tight, scripted experience. And I think if you want that sort of, emotion and that sort of stuff, you should just go watch a film. And I think the real beauty of games comes when player agency and the, player autonomy and the sort of organic gameplay elements collide. Like in games that we've seen, like Far Cry 3, even though that's a Ubisoft game, we can, it's still, I think that's the real beauty of games when these, organic elements and play agency mix and react.
Thank you, sir. We've got somebody down here. Alan.
Sorry, I'm terrible with names, but the one all the way second to the left, you said you had this obsession with games where you couldn't get out of it, and you couldn't get out of it, and you were stuck in this kind of loop, and you couldn't get back into society. What I was thinking about was more this idea of trying to integrate the online with society, trying to integrate this idea that you don't need to leave your online self, online. You can be your true self in real life as well. You can incorporate these things. Like Richard Lewis, for example, has made a career out of his passion for gaming and his passion for online esports and Counter-Strike. So I was just thinking, we shouldn't be rehabilitating these people. We should be trying to explain to them, that they can incorporate these features of their life into real life to make them better human beings and make them more whole.
Thank you. Alan, unless there's anybody else who's going to get the last word from the floor at least.
So 4chan was brought up, and also trash talk. Don't you think that in the age of campus safe spaces and therapy culture, where everyone's increasingly worried about hurting people's feelings, that these centres of millennial culture where people try, like 4chan and like games where there are trash talk, where people try and actually try to outdo each other in terms of offending people and being outrageous, isn't that a positive thing? Aren't those the rebels of the millennial generation?
Okay, you've got about 45 seconds each for your final thoughts. I'm so sorry, panel. I'm going to go down from Mark down the line. Okay. So, Mark, your final thoughts.
Right, final thoughts. Just responding to a couple of things that were mentioned that I think we haven't talked about before, is that we often think about games as this homogenous unit, and of course people have pointed out that there are a huge variety of games. There is a huge variety of gamers, and so the point about competitive gamers, we know because we have good statistical models that people play games because of different motivational forces, and I think that's quite an important thing to appreciate. So Freddie's point about different preferences for games, we know some of the factors that affect why people play specific games and what they get out of them. We don't all play games for the same reasons.
Carl.
Yeah, Freddie, I cried during Last of Us, and the only time I did it before then was Final Fantasy VII, I think. So it was about the emotional connection with the character. I actually prefer free, open games as well. It is quite on rails. My final point is this. This is an incredibly exciting time for gaming. And I envy all the people on this panel that actually get to do this much more than I do as a job. We have seen gaming go from being a niche, fairly niche activity to actually becoming now bigger in some circumstances, in some reports, to cinema and film put together. So we will see next, I am sure, the kind of growth in kind of mainstream cultural and social criticism of games. We will see the BBC shows, we will see newspaper columns. It will be treated alongside art and theatre as one of the great ways in which we can tell this constant story of who we are, this great mystery of what we're doing on this planet. And that means, I think, as a final point, it's all going to also get a lot worse, the games that are going to there is a massive economic incentive in getting your game as the centre of a moral panic. Games employ publicists to whip up tabloid frenzy about their games. It's a bit hidden, but it's absolutely true. They will, because this is one of the ways that you can guarantee that you're going to move units. And I think this is a good thing. We are going to see games in the next 5 or 10 years that are going to constantly be pushing a sense of what is outrageous, what is decent, what is genuine, and what is good. And my final point, sorry, is this, that we move forward as a society by actually answering the hard questions, not the easy ones. And gaming will, I think, socially and culturally keep asking us really hard questions. That is a form of rebellion and radicalism which I think is worthwhile and necessary, and long may it live. And I really look forward to the next 10 years, and I'm sure many people here on what you do in gaming.
Richard?
So unfortunately I can't answer any of your questions. I'm going to go straight to my closing statement. I do accept alcoholic beverages, though, if you're really interested. So just some science studies that haven't really been brought up, and I don't expect you've read about them because the mainstream media and, of course, the games media have turned on us and don't want to tell us about these things. There was a study at the Appalachia Educational Laboratory that showed children with ADHD showed improved reading scores after playing Dance Dance Revolution. There was Michigan State, it absolutely is. University of Children and Tech project found a relation between video game playing and greater creativity regardless of gender and race, no matter the genre of game played. There's numerous other ones. I've got so many here. You can go out and find them yourselves. I strongly recommend that you do. My favourite was done by Twitch TV and Neil Howe, a social researcher, and they found that people who mock gamers tend to be more antisocial, unsuccessful, and less educated than those that don't. It's there. The science supports us. But anyway, so gamers have been demonised. Anyone could go out there and watch that awful BBC Panorama documentary. I wrote a rebuttal to that. It was referenced in The Independent. But here's the thing. I recently got back from Atlanta, where the Turner Network are discussing to put a Counter-Strike League on television, on the TBS channel. It'll be there, right up there with Conan and Family Guy and all the other stuff that they show. So do not allow yourselves to be stigmatised. Gamers are not dead, whatever the mainstream press might want to tell you.
Thank you, Richard. Christina.
Yes, someone brought up someone back there, the question of, why are so many of the games attracting males rather than females, a small percentage of females. People ask the same question about engineering. It's about the same numbers. To this day, after massive efforts to gender integrate this field of computer science, computer engineering, it's still hard to get over 20% women. Now, when you play these video games, I think if you advance and you really get involved and you continue, you are probably someone who's succeeding at this, and it's you're navigating through a formal system, and it calls on spatial reasoning, and men have better spatial reasoning, and Mother Nature is fair. Women are more literate and verbal, but men have an advantage with spatial reasoning. We have masses of research about vocational interest, and they will ask, would you rather spend 2 weeks taking apart a machine and putting it back together, or talking to a group of people about their problems? And I don't know that I'd really want to do either, but okay. You find that far more women want to talk about problems and help people, directly through verbal interaction, and far more men find it interesting to take apart the machine. There are women who want to do that, and those tend to be people with slightly better spatial reasoning skills who might really want to go into engineering, and they probably play video games. Now, there are, as we've said, the games are expanding. There are games for games are going to become the medium for teaching, for everything we do. There will be a possibility of using games. Games are a wonderful tool for learning. So it's diverse. You're going to have storytelling. You'll have novels. This is one thing I found so absurd in the critique, is that it was such a caricature of the world of games, because there's already a plethora, and it's growing, and it's, and if you want it, whatever you want, do it. You can have it. But don't, this way that they've turned it into an occasion to bash men, which is all the fashion in our society, is bashing men, and a kind of reverse sexism. I became a feminist in the 70s, as I did not appreciate male chauvinism, but the answer to chauvinism is not the reverse. And I'll give you another example. Not only are people trashing men for the things they like, but even the games that do have, heaven forbid, a scantily clad woman, or, big boobs, or a sexy, not all men, but some men, young men, like that. And what I find now is there's an intolerance for conventional male sexuality. So in the past, there was all sorts of policing of the things that gay people enjoyed or trans people. I thought that was wrong. But now it's as if the one group you can pathologize and demonize as males and the male gaze and so forth. And I think that has to stop. So I think if we took the gender politics out, we could get on with this wonderful and creative world of gaming.
Thank you, Christina. Sabrina, last word.
So I think we all agree that games are pretty amazing. They're, the stage that they've got to is due to one thing, and that is artistic freedom of game developers. And I think that we absolutely have to make sure that that is something that's respected. And there is a big difference between encouraging types of games and shaming or banning. We have to make sure that if we're criticising something, we're doing it in a way that doesn't put pressure on someone to change it. They can consider that themselves. So, yeah, don't allow game developers to be shamed or games to be banned if you actually care about video games.
Thank you very much. Could we just thank a fantastic panel? And you, the audience. Fantastic.